Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today we'll be taking a look at hashtag DRCL Midnight Children Volume 5. This is by Shin'ichi Sakamoto. I apologize if this channel seems like it's just turning into a Shinichi Sakamoto nut hugger channel. That was always going to be the case with any of his work. I'm just a huge fan of his work. But we're also in this time where all of a sudden, like, his two previous major works, one of my favorite of all time, The Climber, is finally coming out in an English translation. His follow-up to that, Innocent and Innocent Rouge, are coming out in translation. That's also a phenomenal book. And then his current series, which is currently being serialized in Japan, is also getting serialization in English. So his three major works are all coming out at once. I love them all. I have a lot to say about them. I was trying to pull back, especially on the hashtag DRCL, because it's not something that people are familiar with from having been around online and scanlations and stuff for a long time. But the thematics of it and like the contortions of the thematics are kind of in this volume especially, and I'm sure in later ones, are becoming really interesting to me. And there's a lot of stuff going on in the art that's really interesting to me. So I'm going to go ahead and do a review anyways. But yeah, I apologize if this is what I'm talking about a lot, is this artist, because I've been limiting my spending and limiting the amount of time I spend reading, just so I can be focused on the house and the property that we bought a year ago. I announced this. So we're in that slowdown point on the channel, but I'm worried that this is like one of the few things I'm reading. So I don't know. I apologize if there's a lot of Shinichi Sakamoto content right now. I just find his work really exciting. So for anyone who is kind of coming to this series new, this is a retelling of Dracula. I don't know why he's chosen Michael Jackson as his very obvious Dracula. I start to formulate some thoughts about that in this volume, why he's using that symbol as like a metaphor. But the way the metaphors kind of come together and fall apart, or my understanding of them is not correct, is part of what's interesting and what I want to talk about. So we're doing Dracula. This is set in the post-industrial revolution England, and there's a little essay about how that affected people here. And Shinichi Sakamoto, if you've read Innocent and Innocent Rouge, is very interested in social movements and the freedom of the individual. He's obviously set that book, Innocent, in the French Revolution for a reason, because a lot of the philosophy that leads to like the rights of the individual come out of that time. He's set this story with the main characters like Jonathan and Mina and stuff are children in a boarding school, and Dracula's coming in there. Those kids kind of take on different identities as well from what they would have had in the original story. Like Quincy Morris is a black kid from Texas. There's a kid named Joe Sawa who's Asian. Renfield is a young girl, I believe, in this story. Luke is also Lucy, so gender fluid character. Mina is a servant at the school. So there's all these different kind of social categories that these characters are in that I don't remember being part of the original book, but it's making for an interesting twist on the original story. So obviously, like I said, we're in the post-industrial revolution England, and that creates the setting. It gives Shinichi Sakamoto the ability to go into all that kind of very beautiful imagery, like in Innocent and Innocent Rouge. He's leaning into all the beautiful imagery, the Rococo kind of imagery. Now we're looking at more of like Victorian elegance and this kind of beauty, but that's a big part of his work. In the artwork, even though he's obviously working digitally, and I think there's some things in here that look a little bit too much like just adjusted photographs, I feel like he's really starting to find his voice as a digital artist, well, kind of constantly always pushing his voice and always pushing the limits of having art that's prepared specifically for print using digital means. And there's a lot of really interesting kind of new techniques that he's coming up with in here. Like in this page here, it almost looks like he was drawing with charcoal and then converting it into like a diffusion dither pattern, or he's working with some kind of digital tools that get a charcoal look to get the hustle and bustle of London at the time, and just kind of showing that urban sprawl and the speed of it, which is really interesting because when you get some of those old photographs too. They're either the exposure is too long to catch people, or they get that kind of blur in them because of the long exposure. And so I just think like there's a lot of very smart decisions being made in the artwork. Here we have Jonathan Harker, who's obviously gone, and you can see he's disabled. So that's another one of these kind of social justice categories, people marginalized categories, however you want to think about it. He's obviously gone to Dracula's castle, been bitten, like kind of made into a slave. So I think he's a vampire. And in here you have this long sequence where there's this metaphor of Michelangelo's David, which, if you know anything about art history, is kind of like a symbol of the patron, and the actual, where you get the term patriarchy from, is the patronage system. So like that time in history, like the construction of Western civilization, this symbol of that, but then also the symbol of like the individual, the artist that like bucked all of that and still kind of had his unique voice show through in Michelangelo, like the first really passionate artist. I'm just not sure how Shinichi Sakamoto's using that imagery. Like if it is the beauty of the art created by the individual, or if it's a symbol of like the oppressive system. I'm just not sure how he's using it. So then I'm just not quite sure what the crumbling of this means. But in this scene, Jonathan's kind of like, I think, realizing his own commitments to the system that are keeping him trapped, and that this is the system crumbling and falling away now that he's become a vampire. So now that he's like marginalized and he sees through the system, I'm not sure. I'm really just not sure. Like while I was reading it, I kind of was like following one track of that argument, and then it would kind of fall apart and come back. So I'm going to have some more thoughts on why I think that symbolism, and especially like the David being picked both as a symbol of something that was, paid for by patrons for a strong political purpose, but then also like kind of seen as a height of artistic individualism. Yeah, I'll have to dig into that later. But I think A, beautiful image, and B, like just an interesting kind of set of symbolisms he's working with. You get more of that in the writing here, kind of this thematic stuff. So you have Mina saying, naturally, none among us is an innocent cherub. You have been my ally through the best and worst, and I swear to the heaven you can count me as your friend forever, Jonathan. So she's kind of telling him, like, hey, none of us are innocent in this. Like, don't be sad that you've bought into this system. And I think that's what she's saying there. And then we go to the next page, and you have this image of her with like these demonic wings. And she says, that devil wormed his way into my mind as well. How heinous. I will see the undead king driven from this world, mark my words. So that's where I start to think like Dracula himself and turning people into vampires is a symbol for the system that we're all complicit in maintaining. And, that she's saying it's so easy to have this devil worm his way into your mind, which is true. So that's kind of how I'm reading that. Again, beautiful imagery. I think Shinichi Sakamoto is doing a lot of interesting stuff. Switching between diffusion dithers, dot tone patterns, and then actual like drawn hatched lines that he's crossing out with white, and like the way that he's getting values, the range of like different, he's using all three kind of different print approaches that you could be taking, and using that to create texture, using that to create blurs. I think, if you're going to be working as a digital artist, like really be thinking about that. You're a printmaker, and he really seems to be doing that. Just another bit of kind of thematic evidence in the writing here. Doubtless the undead king possesses the ability to invade the hearts and minds of others, and through his bite, this terrible power has passed to us as well. And so again, this reinforcement that Dracula and vampires are like a metaphor by people who are consumed by the system, the dark system that Industrial Revolution brought upon us. And then she says, I have named this ability trance, borrowing from the name Transylvania and the notion of transcendence, which I think that's kind of an interesting thing. The etymological connection there. I don't know if that's actually, I'd have to look that up, whether there is a connection there or not. to me, at first, I read that and say, "Oh, okay, like we're bit by Dracula, we're in the trance of the system." But then Mina immediately turns around and uses this trance state to psychically communicate with other characters in the book, which then to me goes to the opposite of like this more interconnected, less individualistic, and more collectivist ideal of things. So again, like what I assume he's saying with the metaphor and the wordplay he's using is like immediately subverted in the next scene where it's like kind of takes on the opposite. So again, I'm not quite sure. Then she's going back and she's trying to think, what have I been doing just before the count entered my mind? I thought back on that moment, and she remembers saying, catch as catch can, do whatever one can. Of course, my cry of catch as catch can had acted as a spell of sorts, opening myself to the count and letting him in. So I'm reading that as like this ends justify the means, do whatever one can to win, like in catch wrestling, is kind of saying like act without an ethics of care, and that invites in all of the damages of a control system, I think is what he's trying to say there. But then again, we go back into this trance state thing as like a way to psychically communicate, which kind of undermines, I think, this other, how we let this idea into our head, how we got consumed by the glamour or the trance, which I don't know. I don't know which thing is trying to be said there. Love this page. This is another example of where I think the digital art is helping Sakamoto achieve something that probably could be achieved all analog, but not on a monthly schedule, and just some really innovative visual, like beautiful visual effects. So here now we're inside of a character's mind, and Jonathan Harker's mind, and all the sketches that Jonathan has made, and the sketches are coming to life. So you have all these really strange images, especially this one here, where you have basically a two-dimensional drawing then put into perspective, and on some of them you can kind of see the other side of the silhouette, and here you have some of these twisted silhouettes. This would also go along with some of the anamorphic effects that you would see, especially in like Jan van Eyck painting with the skull with the anamorphic effect. So a lot of historical references leading to like very, very exciting contemporary looking images. Here's another image I just really like. I mean, this is where I think Shinichi Sakamoto is at his best, is working with very surreal imagery and letting the imagination go. This is a piece of silver being thrown at a vampire, and the vampire's whole body contorting to not touch the silver. I think it's in those moments where he lets himself just have the visual metaphors, have the visual play, that it's like, I don't care if this right here is a digitally adjusted photograph that's had some drawing on it. I'm still seeing some what I consider, really kind of innovative imagery. We have the Lucy Luke character, the Lucy Luke Westrinos. Luke is a male character that has some kind of either split personality, which you can see kind of represented in this page, where he also has a feminine side, or he's struggling with his gender identity or his trans. I'm not sure, that's not made completely clear, but like Lucy comes out at night is the female, and Luke's awake during the day. And this scene is showing the internal struggle between Luke and Lucy, and Luke is saying that Lucy is a filthy, unprincipled trollop. It wants her gone from his person, and she's saying, I must refuse, like your notions of chastity keep me bound, they ought to go to hell. I'm going to fuck my way through this life as if there's no tomorrow. And then you can see this individual really struggling with it and pulling it away. So to me, it's emphasizing like the constraints of a system versus the liberty of the individual to kind of follow who they are and realize themselves. So I think we're on kind of like the pro-gender fluid kind of side of things. But then we have them kill the vampire, and those who threaten the order of decent society, heretics, iconoclasts, nonconformists, must be purged for the good of all. This is how we've been taught. So you have the Luke character they're killing the Luke character in an effort to kill the Lucy character and the vampire. So here I'm seeing again that even though Dracula is somehow, as far as I can tell, representative of the bad ideas of the system getting into you, when anyone gets bitten by that, the vampire is kind of the representative of the queer, the outsider, the things like that that need to be shut down. So again, I get confused. Like, is the vampire the queer, the outsider, or is the vampire the person infected by the system? And then there starts to be like this language in here where it's almost like, okay, good, we killed Lucy and we got Luke back. So the message gets a little mixed up there. Then we start to mix in all of a sudden Jack the Ripper for some reason. So this is much bigger than just a retelling of like Dracula in and of itself. It's taking the Dracula story as obviously as some kind of thematic metaphor for what Shinichi Sakamoto wants to talk about how the Industrial Revolution affected us. And obviously, we're going to bring in Jack the Ripper as well if we're looking at that bigger theme. I really like this bit of text, especially given where the world's at now. He says, but the darkest hour is always just before dawn. So it's showing this like boiling up of this negative energy coming out of the Industrial Revolution. We get some extremely horrific imagery, which Shinichi Sakamoto, if you've seen Innocent, has no problem putting beauty right against some of the most horrific images you can see, and that continues in this book. I found this panel here really, really interesting because these character drawings that I'm assuming he's pulling from like newspapers at the time, you can see they're very, very like Western cartooning, and you can see that Shinichi Sakamoto has the chops to probably do like Will Eisner style if he wanted to. The like early American cartooning kind of shows up in that image. So I think that's interesting. This is an artist that has constantly shown an ability to be a stylistic mimic for, again, metaphorical purposes. So going from very realistic imagery to kind of quoting different styles of manga for different purposes. It's really interesting to me to see some of the more Western lineage of comics showing up there as well. Jack the Ripper is introduced as a painter. And so here we have this sequence where Shinichi Sakamoto is now using, I don't know if these are like actually digitally made images or if these are things that have been done physically and then scanned in and converted to dot patterns, halftone patterns. There's some obviously digital textures put on top of it, but it's an interesting look. It looks more like painted, and again, like stylistically kind of derived from like social realism styles, where it's still pretty realistic, but you have, or just realism in general as a style, a historical style. Where you're paying attention to the common people and the brushstrokes are a little bit looser than the academic work at the same time. So very spot on in terms of the imagery. In terms of the metaphors that are being made, again, I'm a little confused, but it's starting to help me understand maybe where that confusion comes from. So the character's admitting, Jack the Ripper is who I am, and with these immaculate canvases, I have slaughtered more women than you could possibly know. So that's again just kind of playing with this idea. I think of, in art history, you get the idea of the male gaze and representation of women throughout history as subjugating them, and that all of that conversation. But then Shinichi Sakamoto is like tying that to like the responsibility of the artist. And he is an artist himself who's drawing beautiful women, who's drawing nude women. Like there's I don't know if I tagged the page. Yeah, this scene here where he's drawing like kind of the sexy zombie girl. And throughout Shinichi Sakamoto's work, there's a real obvious love for, like I said, in Innocent, there's the Rococo and his love for these beautiful flowy forms, the way he draws hair and things. He seems very committed to beauty and the power of art. But I've been starting to study more art history because I'm starting to teach that course. And you realize pretty much anytime we go, I wish the world still looked like that, we're talking about art from a totalitarian regime and artists that are being forced to work in a certain mode. So I think what's happening, I think part of my confusion, and I think maybe what Shinichi Sakamoto is trying to acknowledge by bringing this artist Jack the Ripper character in is it seems like he's having an internal struggle as an artist between like his affinity for, and it's the same struggle I'm going through, so maybe I'm just mapping my own current struggle onto this, but the affinity for like the old classical art, neoclassical art, all of that beautiful stuff, but trying to divorce that from the politics that went with it and feeling conflicted about that. So I think that's where some of the conflicted, confused metaphor earlier in the book about the vampires is either coming in subconsciously or it's kind of intentionally mixing up the thematics to complicate it in a way that these things get complicated in the real world. And I think the Jack the Ripper character is kind of another example of that. And here, we go back again to the more beautiful images, the flower and all the nice patterns and the beautiful clothes and things. There's another quote here that's pretty interesting. Just as the painter suggested, my eyes had been clouded by prejudice and preconception. So, like, yeah, as an artist, as an art teacher, I'm always advocating for the way that art can open you up to being a better critical thinker, a better observer, all of that. And the character follows it up and says, the pursuit of truth demands that one discard all prior certitudes and confront only the bare truth. So then this is an advocacy for like the empirical scientific worldview that would have been taking over at the point, and having the Jack the Ripper, the painter, being the one who's advocating that, like we can put aside our emotions about someone and just cut them up and view them as pure meat. I think that's a little bit of what's being said. But then there's also the argument being made for like what has always historically been accomplished in times that have focused on, more reason and scientific advances and stuff. And you get Greece, Rome, the Renaissance, like all of these also, heavily kind of totalitarian environments. And so I think he's again like struggling with that as a theme throughout. It's interesting to me that as we go into the Jack the Ripper section, he's showing something that's similar to what Alan Moore did in From Hell, except instead of doing the pentagram, he has all of these buildings that are being bought, and they've been made into a gigantic coffin for Dracula as he comes into London. I don't know if Shinichi Sakamoto has ever read From Hell. I don't know. It would be interesting, but it's very interesting to me that this Jack the Ripper character now has like two comic instances at least that are tying that part of the story to this idea of marking out like a territory for somebody magically along ley lines or whatever. So that's cool. It's just a cool image there. Another one of these images that Shinichi Sakamoto is doing what looks like something in the real world analog and putting it into the book to try and mimic the look of a painting. Again, talking about like beauty and the ideals of beauty in art, I think mixing that up. But then also we get to the Renfield character who's being called so beautiful here. And you're looking at someone like trying to revive and bring that beauty back using mechanical means. And we get an utterly like horrific image here. So that just fluctuation of the theme and the inability to pin down the metaphors throughout. I don't know if it bothers me, like the author doesn't really have it fully resolved in his head, or if I think it's a strength of the thing where the author's either purposely complicating the situation, or because the author is trying to resolve an internal battle, those things haven't resolved in the text yet. I don't know. Or like I said, maybe I'm just totally mapping my own kind of current things that I'm thinking about onto the book. But it seems all pretty justified by backing it up with what's being said and how the images are playing out in the book. And then on top of this, you got images like this. Come on, like that's just a fucking cool image. So probably going to have to keep talking about this series along with all the other Shinichi Sakamoto work, because I just think, especially in terms of current manga, he's at the very, very top of the pile. and one of my favorite artists, one of the most compelling artists I think out there right now. Even if there are things about the work that some people don't like, the violence or the use of the computers or things like that, I still think his work is at the very, very top of the pack.